welcome to Corner Gallery. Today's episode will be slightly different than some of our previous episodes. This will be more of a reflection piece and a bit of a commentary on some of the artwork. So today I have with me in the studio John Troy and Grant Hargate. First of all, gentlemen, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being here. So I want to talk a little bit about Tim Sawyer, first of all, as a person, an artist, and then get into a little bit of his artwork that's here in the gallery now. So whoever wants to tackle this first, just tell me about Tim as an individual.
You want to go?
Sure. Tim. Tim was slightly older than I was. But we acted like we were twins at times. Mm-hmm. He was the responsible one, or sometimes I was. But he was an older student who really wanted to learn and excel. Mm-hmm. He wanted to do what he came to study. As do you.
Right. So definitely a dedicated student then, and a great person, you'd say.
Well, that's no doubt.
So talk about him a bit as a student. You mentioned he got back into school a little bit later. So talk about some of the qualities he showed as a student, being that with him being older and coming back to school, he probably was a lot more focused than some students you've dealt with.
He was, and as we've said about Tim a lot, he embraced his passion late. He had a real passion and an interest in ceramics from an early age, and studied it as an undergraduate. But then got married. Life got in the way. Did military service. Took a lot of different jobs, and so it really wasn't until he was in his 50s where I think he kind of allowed himself to pursue, this kind of nagging love of his, and he had he and his wife Christy found themselves in St. Charles. He took some kind of adult education classes at St. Peter's Art Center or someplace. Really found the love and started looking for curriculum, and showed up at Lindenwood one day, in Grant's studio, and said, I need to be a potter. Right. What do I do? It was Grant who said, get an MFA. And Tim was like, an MF, a Master of Fine Arts degree at my age. And Grant said, yeah. And Tim did it. He was, it's a full-time 2-year program. And he was a dream student because he had found his passion, right. Later in life, when he, as Grant said, he was so focused, he was so determined, he was going to get the most out of this degree possible. So for those of us in academia, that's a dream come true.
Oh, absolutely. Especially you being teachers, I'm sure you've both had students that they're just there for the grade, really, or because they have to be, not so much because they genuinely are intrigued and want to pursue this. Yeah. So it's definitely
one or two we've had like that.
Most of them love it.
Well, that's always a bonus. So Grant, with you talking about you all being kind of close in age, and then last time we spoke, obviously you're a ceramics teacher, you do love ceramics as well, and so you no doubt probably clicked a lot then on a lot of levels, would you say?
I'd say yes. He came around at the right time, We had saved this ceramics together, It didn't get. They wanted to remove the whole program from the building,
Right.
They wanted the building, and we just kept trying to build stuff, and Tim was a natural-born builder. So I could say, I need these kills built. and we'd work together and get the kilns built. He'd go out and do a project for us out at Boonsfield Village, and you know, he just came at the right time, and it was very inspirational to me. You know, he used to say, I used to say, Tim, are you ever afraid of anything? And he'd say, well, sure. I said, do you ever did not do something? It was very intimate, obviously, our relationship.
Right.
He said, yes, I often feel like I don't want to start something. He said, but I'll start.
Right.
And it was like, yeah, okay, smarty pants. But he was like that all around, you know. He worked from the heart.
Got you. And with you talking about how dedicated of a student he was and coming back and then getting that MFA, was it shocking at all to see that transition to him then teaching it? Because when you've got that much of a passion for something, you can't help but want to talk about it and help other people to understand it. So I imagine that was probably like the natural progression, an easy fit for him to join you all as teachers.
It was. He was a real natural in the classroom, and as Grant has said, the students just really took to him from the very beginning.
And with his recent passing, I just want you to talk a little bit about how you were able to set up a gallery featuring his art and how you were able to coordinate that with his family. With that being somewhat of a tribute to him, really, with you mentioning how he kind of helped save ceramics along with you, we talked a little bit about your side of that whenever we sat down together. And now knowing that he was a part of that as well, I assume you couldn't help but want to kind of have a tribute to him in some way and get his art in there in the gallery.
Yeah, Tim. Tim was a beloved member of the LU Art and Design program for 12 years, well over a decade. First as student and then as adjunct faculty. He taught us so much. That when he died last spring, we knew we wanted to do something very formal as a tribute, as you say, to what he had given us. He hadn't taught for us for a couple years. He had Parkinsons, and he continued to make ceramics and pottery after the Parkinsons took hold, but he really felt he couldn't give his all in the classroom anymore. So, but when he did pass, we thought, we need to do something for his memory, and exhibitions are what we do. They're our stock and trade, and in the art and design program, we do exhibitions to inform the community of what's important in the field, and show the highest quality we can to the students. So we felt an exhibition of Tim's work would fit all of that.
And how much work goes into that with having to coordinate what pieces you want, then figuring out how to set it out? Because you generally would have artist input and be able to work alongside them. So how then did you have to deal with that this time around?
So Tim's wife, Tim Sawyer, who is also an artist, and Christy, there are a couple paintings in the exhibition of Tim that Christy did. She is primarily a painter, but she worked alongside Tim in ceramics. They had a studio down, they had a shop down on Main Street. They had another studio down the street on Kings Highway for a number of years. She worked alongside him as a technician. So she knew the work really better than anybody. And so we asked her basically to curate it. And as you say, it is a job. Anytime you're putting together an exhibition, there's a lot of design work involved. There's a lot of thought on the theory and the arrangement of pieces. How best to tell Tim's story, the trajectory of his aesthetic life that's told through the work. For us, we were grateful. Grant and I met with Christy and talked about the exhibition, and but we pretty much left it to her and said, you know his story better than anybody, and we trust you to put it together. So she did, and then we do the installation part. Arranging it in the gallery, lighting it,
Right.
labels, all of that stuff.
It's beautifully done, by the way. I mean,
Thank you.
obviously the work already is
Yeah.
very impressive, as you can see these behind me, but the way it's set out, you guys did a wonderful job of doing that. And Grant, we talked earlier, and you said there's pieces in there from after his student career here, and then also while he was a student. So were some of those at all pieces that you were around while he was working on these things?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The first piece was when you walk in the room. It was a little animated aardvark, I think it was.
Ah, okay.
I don't remember.
I know
But
which one you're talking about.
Those ones, and a few of the wood-fired pieces he did as a student. Yeah, I think the exhibit really shows. It's amazing. Just somebody passes away, and you got to try to encapsulate their whole life and their body of work in 20, 30 pieces. But I think
Right.
I think all those pieces I can relate to part of Tim's life. Even that cookie jar back there. He said one day that he was a little upset about cookie jars because you could only get one cookie at a time out of them, and so he was going to make his cookie jars. I guess he wanted 2 cookies, 5 cookies at a time.
Right.
I don't know, but yeah, I watched a lot of those pieces. I listened to Tim talk about some of those pieces, which is what artists do. They talk
Right.
about what those images are.
And so for you guys, it's got to be a little bit of a different experience than being around the artist and kind of hearing his thoughts on them or seeing the work on it, whereas the normal viewer has probably never seen these before and doesn't really know anything about them besides, oh wow, this is really pretty or impressive. But for you to be able to know this artist personally and to have been able to see his progression or get his input on pieces, it's got to be a whole new perspective, right? So with that in mind, I want you, because cookie jar was the next thing I wanted to talk about, and with you doing ceramics things, you have probably better input than anybody would on that type of stuff. Isn't easy to create as far as,
Well, it's not quick,
yeah.
but I mean the wheel throwing process. Once you learn, a jar like that can be thrown in a matter of minutes.
Really?
Yes. So 5-minute stops for the bottom part. No, I mean that's how.
Right.
It is a process that's learned by most anybody who has the patience. But it does take patience. And it's got a few parts there.
Yeah, well, the part that really kind of stuck out to me is getting the hand to kind of come out and then also having the lid sit in there. How do you even really layer a piece like that? Because with ceramics, you have to build the vase. Slowly but surely you get that up. Then you have to, I believe, what's cross-hatching to get the pieces to stick. As far as like the hand, and how do you even, I don't know, it just blows my mind that you can get something to be so realistic and not have it crumble. Because while doing ceramics, I've had so many things that in my head I was like, oh, this is going to be perfect. You try to get that stuff together and it just didn't work out for me. So
Yeah. I think by then his level of, any potter's level of expertise, what they can do with the craft is it's well established. So for
Right.
Tim to make a hand and set it in a jar and then let the lid on top of it, the clay we made, could withstand that stuff. You know, you can't make a clay that's going to fall apart while you're working with it.
Right.
It's got to stay together until it gets into the kiln.
And also, now this piece directly behind me, you said that was one of the student pieces, correct? And there's a couple of them like that have the different patterns on them. So as an artist, how do you give that effect to pottery or ceramics? Because it's different than anything I've ever seen, even in some local art shops. I haven't seen something quite like that. So can you describe maybe the process of making something like that or giving it that look?
It's multiple pours. Okay, some of it's sprayed on underneath, the glaze was sprayed on. And then the big greens, leaf form, it's just poured on with when the glaze is very liquid. No brushes are used. In fact, the bottom might be poured also.
Okay.
But it's just the best way to put a glaze on is to pour it. It's more consistent, you don't see brush strokes.
Right.
Pour it or airbrush.
And that is something I didn't even know you could do. I guess my ceramics experience is obviously very limited, but I didn't even know that you could spray or pour the glaze on to give it such a clean finish in that manner.
Well, it gives it a very functional finish too, because when you brush, you sometimes pull the glaze back off the pot.
Right.
And when you pour, you're depositing glass on the stone. So it's acid proof. But then you can use it for anything.
Got you. And there's just so many pieces in there. You said, what, 30 or so?
There are 40, actually.
40.
Yeah.
Wow.
And one other aspect of Tim's work that is on display and very interesting for those of us that have seen his development. Tim, besides teaching here, Tim would give workshops and demonstrations, and whether it was the Mosaics Art Festival on Main Street, or as Grant said, out at the Daniel Boone home. And when Tim would do his work at the Daniel Boone home, he would do it, almost as a historic reenactor, and do very precise traditional ceramic techniques. Totally hand-built kilns out there. He and Christy would make the clay out there and formulate, it as if it was being made in the 18th century. And he was a purist, in a lot of ways with his ceramics. He believed, he believed in the connection between the user and the object, that the functionality of a cup or a bowl, the importance of that just spiritually and morally even was really, really critical. So he, most of the time he did kind of reject decoration and go for the simplest, most straightforward of vessels.
Right. And I also just wanted to talk about, well, first, I think that input is very important because, like I said, being a casual viewer or consumer of art, I don't think you ever really think that deep into it. Most of us just think, you make the pot or whatever it may be, throw it in the kiln, and there it is. So to hear from you how really important it was to him and deeper than just, let me just throw this together and, here it is, and making your own clay, building the kiln so it will, reflect how it was in that time period. I mean, that's serious dedication that I think that's very important for people to know because, like I said, I think most people take art for granted. They really don't think much about how much time this takes from an artist perspective. We talked about a creativity perspective last time we spoke, And so for them to get that insight, I think is very important. Tell me a little bit about the gallery opening. That was last week, I believe. So some of the things that were highlighted and spoken about for the crowd.
Go ahead.
It was a very exciting opening. It was an opening and gallery talk, as as I'm sure you know. When we bring professional artists into the LU community to display their work, we think it's very important for them to orally present their work as well, to
Right.
discuss it. Primarily, of course, for the benefit of the students, but for the whole LU and St. Charles community. So the opening reception, once the show was ready for the public, usually includes a gallery talk. Where the artist does talk about those things you just mentioned, the intention and the content built into the work, and what the artist sees as the reason for making it in the first place, and how the work has evolved over time, etc. We wanted to do the same thing for Tim's work, because it was important that we treat this show as a retrospective of the work. Tim, as we've said, Tim was a great guy, a wonderful person. But the contribution that we want to pay tribute to is that as an artist.
Right.
And so the emphasis is on the work. So we wanted a gallery talk without it being a eulogy.
Right.
Even though of course Tim isn't here. So Grant and I and Christy, really made a concerted effort to, not speak for Tim, but to kind of speak to the students and a lot of outside people from the community who were there. Kind of like what we're doing now, but explaining, what drove Tim to do it, and his concerns and influences
Right.
in the work. And it was really nice. We had over 100 people, and a number of them had never been to Lindenwood before, because they knew Tim either professionally or personally or
Right.
or through church. So it's always a great time when we can bring people onto the campus who wouldn't normally be here.
Yeah, and that's not only a beautiful moment to kind of, like we talked about, it's a little bit of a tribute to him, to get that out there as well, but then to also get the community involved and
Right.
show that it's not just Lindenwood that appreciates these things. So I think that's a great
Yeah.
highlight of that, to show how much the community is involved in the art, and then how much of an impact that shows that he had on the people around him, for that many people to want to be a part of it and to see it firsthand. So I definitely think that's very impressive. So I also wanted to talk about, with all those pieces in there, is there one that particularly sticks out to you? Because I know the one that sticks out to me, I would have loved to bring it in, but I don't even want to touch that thing. It's too pretty. The piece that the two intertwine.
Right.
It's called Marriage.
Marriage. The name escaped me at the moment. So that's the one that sticks out to me, because I've never seen a piece like that. The two are connected, and like I said, I just was afraid to even get too close to it. It's just, it seems like it just highlights that part of the room. I was immediately drawn to it. So are there any in particular that you were drawn to, or that you maybe had any particular insight on?
I like that. I also like that piece. And I had Christy move it whenever we had to move it.
Yeah.
But when Clay does those kind of swoops and loops and stuff, It's not supposed to survive, because of the shrinkage rate of thick clay and thin clay.
Right.
The thin clay should just dry out so fast that it actually will pull apart. And Tim was, I'm sure he took as much time drying that thing as he did making it, probably more. And, that piece is all hand built, all hand pulled, all stretched clay. And it was not, and it survived.
Right.
I mean, besides, it's very poetic. Maybe a song, or two dancers, I don't know.
Right.
I mean, you can make that, casting it, but he made it all by hand.
I think
And that's a tribute to his skills.
Yeah. Well, now knowing that, I think I have even more appreciation for his work, because making stuff by hand, anything you might be making, is never easy. But I guess that particular one, I felt that while looking at it, that how does that even stay together? Because I've seen so many things, ceramic things, break over time.
Sure.
And so that one, it just baffled me that it's still intact and still gorgeous as ever. It doesn't even look like it's on the edge of, breaking. So that's a real testament to how talented Tim really was. Blows my mind, for sure. So, John, was there one that stuck out to you?
There were a couple pieces that were more recent that he produced after the advent of Parkinsons, and I had not seen them before this exhibition. A couple low bowls and platters. And he called them, tremulous ceramics. Because ceramics, when you're throwing a pot and you're forming with your hands, I mean, steadiness is a virtue.
Right.
But when you have Parkinson's,
Dealing with tremors.
you lose that control. But Tim was able to work through it, and if you look close, you can see some imperfection in the pieces, but that imperfection is kind of part of the beauty too. He rather than get terribly frustrated about it, he kind of embraced some of the irregularity of the process, of the throwing process, and the work is as beautiful as anything else in the show.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things also that gives me more of an appreciation for him, is he was humble enough to say, I can't necessarily give my all to teaching, but I'll step back. But he didn't give up on working as an artist, because things like that a lot of times can make people feel like I just need to hang it up. So with that in mind, I greatly appreciate your perspective, John, as well as Grant, and it was nice to have you guys here today to kind of give me more insight on the show and Tim as a person. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. We enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
So that is all we have for this episode of Corner Gallery. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.